History laid the foundation
that informs our conversation. Welcome to the classroom.
from the church to the streets and even in the suites and all around the world. I'm gonna keep it real in the classroom. Fannie Lou's classroom. Fannie Lou's classroom. Fannie Lou's classroom.
Good afternoon and welcome back to our second episode of our sixth season of Fannie Lou's Classroom. We're super excited and blessed just to still be here and to continue to provide a space where we hope we are offering a dynamic learning community where knowledge transfer is taking place. Because one thing that we believe is that we all are leaders, we all have knowledge to share, and no one person is the holder of all knowledge in all things. So I'm always excited to have amazing guests on the show. You know, we try to bring you the best folk to come on the podcast to have conversations about very critical issues, but doing it in a very relaxed way where we can make sure that it's broken down to the granular level where everybody can get it and understand it, with the hopes that at the conclusion of the podcast, we all feel empowered to do something based on what we heard, whether that's going and researching more of what you heard on the show, whether it's connecting with an organization to continue to work, however you feel led and moved. We just hope it moves you to move and to do something. So as always, I have to always shout out our amazing small but mighty team that makes the classroom work from week to week. Want to shout out Ashley Savage, our new addition to the classroom. She makes sure all things are working, including me, and making sure where I need to be and I'm ready to go. Then, of course, we have Cheryl, and those of you know she's always on getting our guests, making sure our guests have everything they need and they are ready to go. So we appreciate the hard work that goes into tracking down our guests and making sure everybody is ready to go. And then, of course, you're hearing us and seeing us in this beautiful, bright color, clear picture because of our audio and technical engineer, Brooke Mosley. Give it up for Brooke Mosley. So I'm super excited to have such an amazing team. And we have some amazing ministry justice partners who you don't see, who are also behind the scenes, who help do research to make sure that when we have these conversations, it's rooted in facts, because we know in this day and age, facts are relative for some people. So we want to make sure we're doing things rooted in facts and that we are doing our best to be truth tellers as we have important and significant conversations. And so we're ready to jump in. As you know, all of our conversations are designed to deal with the intersection of faith, politics, and religion, right? And gender and class. So it's all these things that we want to have conversations around because they impact us directly. So listen, going to introduce our guest. Our first guest is no stranger to the classroom. She's been here before. She is my sister. She is my friend. And she's going to become my ongoing partner as we travel to Salvador Bahia again coming soon. I'm going ahead and put it out there. So we have Azmera Hammouri-Davis. She has a Master's of Theological Studies. She is a Black Palestinian-American writer, poet, theologian committed to healing our communal transformations. She's a Fulbright scholar and a Harvard Divinity graduate. She's a Portuguese language speaker. She co-organizes cultural immersion trips between the U.S. and Salvador Bahia, Brazil. Her writing, published in 8 languages, alongside her music projects, Young Spirit, Old Soul, and Azmera, has earned her speaking invitations at Comic Cons in New York, London, and San Diego. You can read more about Azmera if you go into our YouTube description page. You'll see more of her lengthier bio. Well, let's welcome my sister, my friend, Azmera Hammouri-Davis, to the podcast. And I'm going to go ahead and say it. She's had an amazing life event happen since the last time she was on the podcast. She married my now brother Dennis. He is now part of the family. So we want to say congratulations again on what you did publicly, what was already joined together in the spirit world. So again, congratulations on your nuptials. And then we have
Thank you.
our new brother to the space. We're excited to have, some of us met him earlier this year in February at the Samuel Dewitt Proctor Conference. And now we have him here in the classroom. Super excited to hear more from him. And he is Elom Tetty-Tamaklo, born in Atlanta, raised in Accra, Ghana, and in Harare, Zimbabwe. Elom graduated from Harvard Divinity School in May of 2025. Congratulations. You just got up out of that Divinity School. You made it out. I know what it is to go through seminary. You made it out of there. Having worked in many places, Elom has always been enchanted by places and stories they contain. He graduated from Harvard Divinity School in May of 2025 and focused on the intersections of lived religion and political culture. His interests revolve around prophetic imagination, popular resistance to empire, and global Black emancipatory politics. Elom is always excited to be in conversation with dreamers, thinkers, and builders. Let's welcome our brother Elom to Fannie's classroom on today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So as you can see, they are both not only well prepared, but they have a heart for people. And they do that at the intersection, what I would call faith and public life. And so what we want to talk about on today, one of the things I mentioned before we came on the air, I talked about if you go across various social media platforms, whether it's TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, etc., YouTube, and of course these days everyone has a microphone, right? So we hear some of everything out in public space. And I was saying whether it's real, imagined, heightened, or instigated, that there's this projected that there's a diasporic war. And so I think it's very important for us to have even more conversations, to create a different echo chamber that really talks about the beauty of the diaspora and what we must do to fight this common thing called white domination that does not pick apart if you were born Black in America or if you were born Black in Haiti or if you were born Black in Salvador Bahia, that it's a level of anti-Blackness that's rooted and grounded in many countries and particularly in the U.S. And so I thought it would be a good conversation to have Elom and Azmera in conversation. Let's talk about this African diasporic, I'm gonna say heightened manufacture. I do think there's some pieces where some people, because we don't know each other, we have been disconnected, we have bought into propaganda, that we come complicit in that, right? So I just thought it'd be great to have the conversation in this space. So I'm just going to jump right in. And so I want to kind of start off with this notion of that we were scattered, but we're not lost, right? We're scattered, but we're not lost. And so let's just kind of jump in with just a basic understanding. If to level set the conversation, maybe the both of you can tell us what is the African diaspora? Let's just talk about when we say that, what do we say? Because language is important. How we translate that is just as important. So let's just, from each of your perspective, what is the African diaspora? So either one of you can go first. Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This is really wonderful. I'm always invigorated and really, I learn a lot from conversations like this. So I'm really glad that we have the opportunity to engage this. As I mentioned, or as the bio mentioned, I grew up in Ghana and Zimbabwe and then moved around the world. So the concept of Africa and the African diaspora has been something that has been extremely important to me in my political formation, in my social formation, because inherent within the concept of diaspora is interruption. For whatever reason, for a diaspora to be created, a people outside an original homeland or native homeland, there is the concept of interruption. And whether that interruption is, I don't want to say self-imposed, but purposeful, the movement of people for whatever reason, whether economic, social, political, or that interruption is imposed by external actors, we're seeing that there's a break in the continuum. And the diaspora becomes communities or subcultures based on these original cultures and people and languages and societies that they have been removed from. And I think it's it's interesting and important to realize that in many ways, diasporic communities take on lives of their own. They take on perspectives and engagements and social standings of their own in ways that are connected to original community, societies, populations, and in many ways also very different. So in my travels, that's one thing I've paid attention to and noticed that various diasporic populations are doing the work of world building and even reconnecting in ways that are particular to them, but also general to sort of the broader population. So this is what I'll say initially about the concept of diaspora and how I personally think and engage with it.
Thank you. Yes, Azmera.
Yeah. I think for me, and I love that Elom, you introduced this notion of interruption, right? Because, as, for example, someone who grew up on the big island of Hawaii, right? On a small town in Hawaii, right? The land of the Kanaka Maoli people who were, their relationship to that land was interrupted by U.S. imperialism and colonialism and empire, and to this day is still commodified, exotified, packaged and eroticized, right? Like it's quite literally, I grew up as an African American, right? My father was Black American, but also Afro-German, and then my mother is Palestinian-American, but also white American. I feel like I grew up in these intersections, right? In these in-betweens. So we would always celebrate, right? Kwanzaa, which is an Afro-diasporic cultural export, hip hop, which is an African-American cultural export, but also capoeira, which is an Afro-Brazilian cultural export. There's this relation and orientation to the continent, right? To the motherland, right? And so I feel like in many ways, my ways of knowing and being have been formed, right? My social formation and location has been formed, quite frankly, in diaspora, being connected to places like Salvador and living there, right? It has the largest population of Afro descendants outside of the continent, but not actually on the continent. And so thinking about the ways in which people in diaspora, because there's been that rupture, sometimes often, can't go back, haven't gone back, don't know how to locate the exact tribes or the exact peoples that they originated from, continue to world build, but also cultivate a sense of Africanity that differs greatly, right, from the white domination that you speak of, but also our ways of knowing and being. So our spiritual practices, right? Our Black Christianity has an Africanity that's much different than white Christianity, right? It can manifest in the ways that you experience church, right? There'll be the call and response in a Black church. You're not going to sit up in a Black church and hear a preacher preaching, and the folks in the pew aren't going to be responding well. Versus going to like an Episcopal. Let me stop.
No,
versus going to
yeah.
different white. You understand what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
I think I'm just highlighting, yes, the world building and world making that holds specific, there are convergences and divergences in relation to and orientation to this continent that in and of itself is heterogeneous, that in and of itself has a number of different tribes, ethnic languages, practices, spiritual practices, cosmologies, worldviews, right?
Correct.
But that from the Western perspective, particularly from the perspective of white domination, as far as that's concerned, it's monolithic, right? Like you were saying, it's like, oh, don't matter. You from Jamaica or Haiti, your skin is Black in the West, right? So I think the diaspora and specifically African peoples are constantly, unfortunately, asked to reckon with and to define themselves up against a sort of senseless sort of domineering empire machine that insists on our flattening, right? And so there's scholars that say, why should we even center? Why pay attention to, right? What does it mean to world build without having whiteness as the center? Why do we need to talk about ourselves in relation to whiteness? We are who we are. We exist separate and apart from this thing that insists on putting its foot on our neck. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, and I think with both of you, what I hear both of you saying, right, that this African diaspora stretches across the globe, right? Whether it's through the Americas, which we also have to have that conversation, because oftentimes we think about America as just the United States, right? And we forget that there's another world out there that exists. And, so, and you know, the Caribbean, Europe, the African continent itself. And to me, what I hear you all saying also is that what we find in that is that we are the descendants of many peoples, right? Very, to your point, Azmera, different, you know, spiritual practices, worldviews, language, culture, etc. Like it goes on and on, just the rich diversity in that. But we're also resilient, right? We have survived the worst that white domination could throw at us, right? And I'm going to say we're brilliant, and we have a form of spiritual power that could not be extinguished, particularly in the U.S., whether that was a whip where you tried to beat it out of us, where it was a noose you tried to lynch it out of us, whether it was some bullets you tried to blow out of us, right? Dogs that tried to bite it out of us, water hoses that could not wash it out of us, that we have something within that I think comes from what's in our DNA that's in us inherently that they cannot erase and they cannot get rid of. And that is why they try so hard to erase us and to try to say, you know, what you believe, how you believe something is demonic. It's witchcraft. How we name things that we do as African people that they then try to demonize. And sometimes we have so bought into it that it's so internalized that we become complicit in the erasure as well, right? And so, so we think about it. No, I think I want to go here next. So I'll just end by this part by just saying what they attempted to erase is imprinted in our very bones and in our being. And we have to know that and not allow them to strip us of that. But we can't do that if we don't know the truth. We can't do that if we don't go back and learn who we really are as a people. And that's one of the things that I attempted to do this week in a 3-day class that I taught here at the church. And I really just want to give people nuggets instead of, because I believe in giving people trails to then go do more research. And because you do better than me standing and lecturing, I'm going to give you some nuggets, a foundation, then you should go build on that and do your own personal research. So you're invested in it. And that way it means more to you to internalize that and absorb it. So I'll stop there. Thank you for that, because I think it's important to kind of level set some we say, because we're going to talk about diaspora throughout this conversation so people know what we mean when we say that. And I'll say this one thing, John Henry Clark, Baba Clark, I remember one time he was teaching in New York, and he, you know, it was some brothers from America, a couple of Caribbean nations were in the classroom, and I guess there started to be some tension between the folks. He said, "Tell you what I did, we're going to stop class. I want everybody to go downstairs and hail for a cab, and then come back and tell me about your experience," right? And so they all come back up, and the cab passed all the black men, right? And so his point was, that's because in relationship to, you know, white domination, they don't see the difference. We're all black to that dominant culture that seeks to have domination and power over you. And then he tells them, I always repeat this. He says how he explained it to him, right? He said, because the only difference between you all in this classroom was where the boat stopped, right? So we just get back to understanding where we all came from. And then, as I think Elom mentioned this to a degree, right, that depending on where we are, yes, we survived the moment. We did a lot of syncretizing with what we believe, what came over in the hull of those ships with Catholicism and, you know, Protestant Christianity. And we emerged, yes, we have these different cultures. And I think that's where people get tripped up too, in what's ethnicity, what's race, and what's national identity, you know. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more. But thank you for that, because I think it was good just to level set what we mean when we say that. So I think you all talked about this. You could add more to it. But what would you say is unique? Because I think sometimes it's not so much as to what you said, Azmera, right, that our existence is not dependent upon white people and what they think about us. It's dependent upon what we think and know about ourselves and how we envision a future where we flourish. What does that look like? Separate and apart from those who seek to demonize and erase us. So what would you say is unique about the diaspora? That gives us something to lean into, to build on, and to grab onto.
Yeah, these are really, really powerful points. I wanted to share an anecdote, actually, after you mentioned the story of the men hailing the cab. And I would preface it by saying that, unfortunately, and let's just be real here. Unfortunately, having grown up in many countries in Africa, one of the things that is very present is a proximity to whiteness as what measures value.
Yes.
So if an individual is proximate to whiteness in a certain way by education, by class, by skin color, there is a certain value that is afforded that individual. So for us and I speak about my personal experience, but I know that this might be a shared experience amongst folks, that when folks coming to America for school or for work or whatever, there is a constant narrative, a toxic narrative, but that has been played over and over again, that it is important to distinguish yourself as African Blacks. So I came to school in my first year, and I believe this was either my first or second year. I was in a car with 4 other Black men, all from Ghana, and we're in DC. And we're just like hanging out, having a good time. And amongst the 5 of us in the car, we had 7 degrees. So 2 people had master's degrees, I believe. So very well educated. We had no criminal records. And the friend who was driving passed a stop sign. He did a rolling stop. Immediately, we see police lights behind us. And being very new to this, we didn't think too much about it. So the police comes up and stops us, asks for the license. And I remember in the moment, one thing that was almost, we didn't have to communicate it verbally, but we all knew, we accentuated our Ghanaianness to say we're different, in hopes that that would save us, which is very toxic. It was an outplay of this toxic idea that had been sold to us. So anyway, we're accentuating our Ghanaianness, be it in our accents, being in our references. 5-6 minutes later, the situation escalates and we have about 4 or 5 police cars around us, guns drawn. Thankfully, nothing happened. Like nothing physical happened, no one was harmed. But when we went home that day, we had a conversation amongst ourselves that in that moment, there was nothing about our Ghanaianness. There was nothing about our West Africanness. There was nothing about our Africanness that would have saved us from the bullet of a white officer. And the bullet does not distinguish. The bullet doesn't hear an accent. And that moment for me was a radicalizing moment where I began to realize through lived experience what solidarity means and what Blackness means within this context. You know, it's interesting because there's a really wonderful writer, Chimamanda Adichie, who talks about, in one of her books, I believe is Americana, she talks about a character who wasn't Black until she came to America. The character grew up in Nigeria, and she says that the conception of a racialized people is a direct result of oppression, a direct result of a continuous need to destroy and wipe out a people. So for folks coming from the continent, from the motherland to North America, for instance, it is important that we are not thinking about ourselves as different, but we're thinking about entering a wider and a larger story. So these are things that I think about often when the conversation comes up, because we have to acknowledge that there are very toxic, pervasive ideas that have been sold to many of us on the continent about our Black siblings in the diaspora. So there is a need and an attempt to distinguish or to separate. And we know that that is the tool of white supremacy,
Right.
to divide and conquer. You know, so that's something that just came up when you referenced that anecdote. So I wanted to share. And I mean, to also say that, look, I didn't come out of my mother's womb sort of knowing the politics of race and racialized classes and things like that. I had to learn, and this has been my process of unlearning.
Thank you for
Yes.
that. That's very powerful witness, and I think that just brings it home, right? And I think about what you're saying, and I'm gonna come to you, Azmera. because as you're explaining how you're taught, you are like in your experience was to accentuate your Ghanaianness, so you seem more African than African American. And the same way in America with folks born here, we have ways in which we try to be approximate to whiteness, and that shows itself in ways that perhaps we may not necessarily have black friends. We may move to a certain neighborhood to make sure that we're not surrounded by black people. It may be through our education, where we talk about where we receive our degrees, where we went to school. I mean, there are ways that we do the same thing, thinking if we could just not seem like the rest of them that they see as being, right, degenerates, as being less than human. I'm not that black person. I'm a different kind of black. And they always find out you're that black person, right? And I saw something the other day, and I was sure I meant to send this to you. Someone said that because I'm making a point here. You know, when you get older, you start going around until you get to your point. But I saw someone say doctors are to black women what the police are to black men. And I started thinking about the black maternal health crisis, because here in America, how, as a black woman, statistics show, research shows your level of education, your socioeconomic status, none of that matters. So if you are a PhD carrying, six-figure making woman, and you have a young girl in South Dallas, 16, pregnant, not many resources, you have an equal chance at dying as a result of giving birth. Because the medical system, and we can trace this all the way back to the antebellum period, right? Where in terms of black women's body, the hyper white gaze on the black woman's body was around labor and production, right? And then depending on the century in which you live, that gaze is always there. It just changes, right? So we were always hyper invisible, but also invisible at the same time. And I think that ties directly to this 300,000 plus black women who have become unemployed within 6 to 7 months, right? So I appreciate Elom telling that story, because we see the various ways in which white supremacy, I hate using supremacy because obviously there's nothing supreme about being about whiteness, right? So that's why I just use the language white domination. So that is the work of it, is to make us see each other as the enemy, as opposed to, because I do believe they know the power and what it means for the diasporic folks and those on the continent to connect, because they're the ones who made the disruption. So they know what is there. So Azmera, please, what is unique about the African, and anything else you want to share, sis?
Yeah, well, just exactly building on what you both just highlighted, I think I would just add the ways in which white supremacy, I'm like white savagery,
Use that one
white,
too.
white delusion. We can just call it delusion.
Mm-hmm.
It comes for the psyches in the African American context, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we think about the relationship between African Americans and Africans, just as Elom, you're saying you all were taught to like distinguish yourselves, right? Like there's a dignity to knowing you weren't enslaved, right? Or you weren't on the boats.
Mm.
I remember growing up when I lived in South Florida for 5 years of my formative years, like when I was like 6 to 12, and it was a predominantly Black and brown community, and folks would make fun of someone that sounded African, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you didn't want to approximate to the continent in that way. Like it was kind of seen as super whack. Like there was this internalized oppression, right?
Mm-hmm.
This idea. You brought up this notion of the wars, the diasporic wars, and to me, I think the ways that especially our public education school system, like schools, are being under attack to not teach our history. That continues the disruption between and stoking the flames and the fire and the tension between our brothers and sisters, siblings across the sea, right? Because it's like, why wouldn't you want to, why would making fun of someone's accent, right? Because we all have accents, right?
Right.
But in America, you begin to think like, oh, somehow your accent is the right one and everyone else has a weird accent. I remember going overseas, to Salvador, and then realizing how American I am, right? And it's so humbling because there's a lot of things that I think we can learn from travel. We can learn from being amongst our siblings overseas. But again, in order to even get to travel, right? I couldn't even conceive of going to Brazil until I got to college, where there was a study abroad program available to me. Like, I'm coming out of, access to education for me was a gift, because of legislation in 1965 that was passed through to the Higher Education Act, right? So because of our forefathers and mothers who were fighting for us, I'm talking about folks coming from, like, we're talking about class, right? Low
Right.
income backgrounds in the US, which we know are the majority of a lot of Black American households. The wealth gap is disproportionate by and large, like by the thousands of percent. In order to get access to education, to then think and want to begin that unlearning process and go see our siblings, and then realize, like, whoa, there's a lot here that we have to learn from, that we have to be proud of, right? I think the ways that our education right now in particular is under attack is telling of how threatened white domination is by
Yes.
us doing this, right? What does it mean to have our younger generations grow up knowing who they are, growing up already having in their imagination a Chala, right? A Black Panther 1 and 2, a world in which I was just at a talk that Ryan Coogler was giving with this guy, Seth Ohanian, who's Armenian. And, he was talking a little bit about his thought process in it coming from Oakland. Ryan Coogler, growing up as an African American coming from Oakland, getting access to a place like University of Southern California to become a filmmaker, but being really committed to knowing that there is nothing about his culture or his heritage that he is willing to sacrifice or willing to water down. And how
Right.
that comes through in each of the films that he makes, right? Beginning with Oscar Grant's Fruitvale Station, the Black American who was shot down at the BART station in Oakland.
Right.
And we see that through line, and we see what that does for connecting a diaspora. I think Black Panther is one creative way in which these kinds of conversations get to be at the forefront in different ways. What does it mean to hold the Chala and the Killmonger, and why did Killmonger
Right.
kill himself at the end, right? I'm going in a lot of different places, but what I'm saying is, I think the ways that we're able to continue to educate our younger people and meet them where they're at. For those of us who do get an education, I'm talking to myself and to, for those of us that are able to get an education on the backs of our ancestors, how do we commit to translating what we learn,
Yes.
such that we're not using language that is isolating and super academified, where younger people can't read or hear,
Right.
It's like, I'm so grateful for a Bell Hooks who committed to using layman terms. Because of her work, I get to know what it is to love and be loved in a different kind of way, that I would not have wanted to sit down and read her books, Communion and All About Love, if she was using if she was performing for whiteness, is what I'm saying, if she was performing for those public publishers and XYZ. So I'll stop there. But I think that's part of what I'm getting at is being able to have access to then go and see and meet our siblings abroad. And then to come back, you learn so much about yourself when you realize, okay,
yes.
this is kind of American.
Oh,
Like,
yes.
me thinking I gotta, people would tell me all the time in Salvador, fica tranquilo, calma, calma, right? This anxiety that we have of, like, you gotta be there on time, you gotta show up on time. We said we're gonna do this now. You know what I mean? I'm like, oh Lord, I gotta unlearn this shit.
Right.
Excuse me. I gotta unlearn this.
Right.
You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
anyway,
absolutely.
I'll pause there.
Yeah, no, I thank you for that, because that's so important. Now, to pick up on that, as you're talking about next generation, right? I think, and I also think, well, let me say this, and I'm gonna go to that. It just always reminds me of one of the many functions of white domination is to keep us so twisted and tied into the menial things, right? So you talked about making fun of people who had African accents. So I think about how what we do, another layer to that, we make fun of people who if you're up north or you have a southern accent, you're from the south, you sound country, right? It's always the ways in which we find ways to negatively make people feel a certain way about who they are and how they came to be. I was born in Alabama, raised in Tennessee, and I live in Texas. I'm a Southerner, and I have no problem with that. right? But how we can also make somebody feel less than because of where they were born, right? And then you oftentimes mistake that for perhaps people may not be as you understand what it means to sound intelligent, to sound like you're a learned person, right? But yeah, I'll stop there because I was going to say something else, but I'm going to keep it real classy in the spirit of Fannie Lou Hamer. I'm going to keep it classy. But I want to shift to then this idea of us also leaning into that we are all not the same. And for me, that's the beauty of God's creation, and that there is unity, right? Does not always mean we're uniform. I don't know if people kind of think, oh, we all come together. What's our one way of being? Now, I do think there's some foundational, what I would say, African ways of knowing, right? This is some foundational things like what it means to be human. We need to all understand what that means, right? But it doesn't mean we're uniform. It's diversity in the, that sounds so cliche, but it's true. Like there's unity in our diversity. And so, you know, we come from many different languages, rhythms, stories, even struggles, right? We also come from different dreams of freedom. It looks different depending on where we are. And so I'm wondering how, and I think faith, however that faith looks in people's lives, plays a powerful role in us coming together and to be unified when we can appreciate and allow people to come into the space the way they are. Like we have to expand this table and not be so tethered to this dominantly white Protestant Christian way of understanding what it means to be human, but also what it means to be in community with other people, right? And I think that's something we have to lean to, because I think, you know, diaspora is so incredible to me because when it comes to our spirituality, it's either going to be rooted in the Black church, Yoruba, you know, Islam, ancestral practices. And I just think it reminds us that liberation then is what we all are going towards, right? And so while it's a political tool, liberation as political, for me, it's sacred as well, right? And so talk to me about, in your perspective, what is significant about the diaspora? What's one of the most significant things about Elom?
I think you're hitting it right on the head. This is the heart of it, that we're unified but not uniform. Because I think that kind of attempt is an attempt at flattening, which is dehumanization in itself. Because no matter whether people speak a specific language or belong to a specific ethnic group or belong to national borders, there are differences, there are peculiarities, there are nuances that afford them humanity. That is what makes them humanity. So we're connected in struggle, we're connected in shared visions, but it is so important, the realization that there is difference. And these differences resist the politics of conformity.
Mm-hmm.
Within the mind of the white Western mind, the Black individual is simple. The Black individual doesn't have complex thoughts.
Right.
The Black individual cannot disagree. The Black individual doesn't have a plurality of language. The Black individual is inept, cannot create, cannot make music in complex music forms, or cannot string words together to form complex poetry. So it is an affront to the mind of white supremacists when they realize that within the Black diaspora, there is a plurality of expression, there is a plurality of academic thoughts, there is a plurality of creative engagement. So I'm thinking a lot about the work of Stuart Hall. I believe he's Jamaican, and Stuart Hall talks about this resistance to simplifying our narratives and to flattening our narratives and to saying that, well, you know, the African or the Black personality in the world doesn't have a beginning, doesn't have an end. Their history starts when they encounter white people, when the Portuguese ships come on the coast of West Africa and Don Diego de Azambuja says that, well, I'm building a castle. That's when our history starts. Impossible. We have histories and stories and medical advancements and architectural
Yes.
advancements and mathematical investments and spiritual cosmologies that we came from and that we are pursuing. So I really appreciate that as we're engaging the question of the diaspora and where our place is in the world and the importance of it, I personally strive to divest from white conceptions of thought, from white conceptions of framing who we are, where our histories are, and where we're going. So that's something that I'm thinking about a lot. And I even think about how our Black thinkers globally have thought about our liberatory movements. I mean, I'm thinking a lot about Nkrumah in the 40s and the 50s, when he thought about Black emancipation. I mean, he was fighting for independence for Ghana as a political entity, but Nkrumah was saying that it is important that Black people globally are free. I mean, I'm thinking about Nyerere of Tanzania. I'm thinking about Lumumba. I'm thinking
Yes.
about Malcolm X. These are folks that constantly were working the machine of liberation to say that our liberation isn't confined. It isn't simple. It isn't straitjacketed, but it's complex. It's nuanced. And this is sort of the liberatory future that we're working towards. And the question that I constantly ask myself and I pose to friends and comrades is, are we able to hold the complexities of our thoughts? Are we able to hold the complexities of our difference in the achievement of liberation? Because if we're going to afford ourselves real humanity means disagreements. Real humanity means differences of opinions. Real humanity means layered thoughts and ideas. So that for me is something that I push and I work towards, that we have to be afforded the full range of humanity as Black people globally.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Azmera.
That I feel like I I don't know that I could add
Yes.
the only thing I would add to that, because for me, again, I think a lot about like our Black arts movement. I think a lot about the Harlem Renaissance. I think a lot about, right, that post emancipation, after, the Reconstruction era, the war, the cultural wars, right? Enslavement ended, in 1865, 1866, the Ku Klux Klan was formed, right? And then you had these, again, I'm thinking a lot about the cultural wars, right? What it meant for D.W. Griffith to film Birth of a Nation and screen it at the White House. And in Birth of a Nation, right, depicting, really stoking all of the fears of Black men as sexual predators, and white women as these women that needed to be saved from these Black men. Like, what those sorts of cultural exports did for the public imagination, in America and abroad, but then how our cultural forms of expression, the Langston Hughes, the Zora Neale Hurstons, even the Maya Angelos, the Alice, like, how we were encouraged to cry, dance, scream, and shout, to let it all out. For me, it's always, I'm like, the poetry that captures the highs and the lows, the ebbs and the flows, the ups and the downs, how hip hop initially was responding to hip hop.
Right.
Fast forward many years later, in 1973, came out of Black and brown youth responding to the violence they were seeing in the Bronx,
Right.
having housing disenfranchisement, and the principles of hip hop were peace, love, unity, and having fun. Before, again, it gets taken and ripped from us. I'm thinking a lot about the ways that I think what is significant, to answer your question about the Black diaspora, is that they tried to bury us, but forgot we were seeds, right? That's what you hear in movement. We truly are seeds, right? And this principle that there's as many ways to be Black as there are to be human, period, right? That's part of what I hear Elom saying. There are as many ways to be Black as there are to be human. And I think that's such a beautiful thing. And it's a timeless truth. It's evergreen. And it's something that I think our cultural forms of expression, and I know Ta-Nehisi spoke to this, right? When he talked about, you can never, who do people call on in times of sadness but Aretha? Where do you go? Can you go to any form of celebration where there isn't Black cultural presence, song, music, dance? and there be joy. No, we teach the world what it means to have joy. We teach the world what it means to reckon with sorrow, right? That's Du Bois in the sorrow songs and prior, right? I mean, and Black women are holding the triple consciousnesses,
Come
right?
on.
Like you're
Come
touching on.
on.
It's beyond just a double conscious. It's the race, class, sexism. Then we get into gender,
Right.
all the things, you know. And so I think for me, what is significant about the African diaspora is that we are boundless. We are world makers. We are boundless. Possibilities are infinite. And I think white domination has peaked that from the beginning, is threatened by it, and wants to siphon, suck, you know, and completely, you know, erase it, repackage it. For me, what gets me hype,
Oh,
what gets
come
me
on.
animated is when
Yes.
when whiteness loves to come and like culture vulture our stuff,
Right.
repackage it, and then sell it back to us in breadcrumbs, and then convince our children that they should accept, you know, this. For me, that's what the craft of capoeira. It's an Afro-Brazilian martial art
Right. Right.
that, you know, enslaved peoples, you know, they were not allowed to practice self-defense, so they disguised it as a dance. And then they're singing songs. You know, they were enlisted, you know, to go to war for the Portuguese against folks in Chile and Uruguay. And if they made it back, they were promised land. They were promised a home. But when they got back, did they get that promise? No. Right? But how did they find their way back after they were in a different land? They followed the river Paraná. They followed a river to come back home to their land where they thought they were going to be free and have housing, which is what they were promised. And so they're singing songs, Paraná, 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 and they're talking about their quotidian life, right? And this is you know, and then they come back to promises that were broken. But to me, it's so beautiful to think like, wow, our people were so innovative. They're creating instruments out of, you know, tire wire and wood that today people practice all around the world. There's over 6 million practitioners of this craft. And again, you see the culture, you know, you see the whitening of it, you see
Right.
the cultural you know, appropriation of it. I digress. But I think that's what I think is significant about our diaspora is like, we're boundless. It's infinite.
Oh, so much I want to say, but I'm gonna move us on. Oh, it's so much I want. You said so much in there that's so rich. But let me keep moving because I know if I start, I won't get to the next thing I want to talk about. But so one of the things I think about, right, when we come together, when diaspora comes together, that we multiply our impact, right? Not just our impact, but we also multiply our movements and build capacity. And when we come together, so whether that's Pan-Africanism, right, which obviously, you know, for me personally, I consider myself a Pan-Africanist, definitely being studying, ongoing study under Dr. Mama Iva Carruthers, who you know and love as well, or whether that's solidarity that you find throughout, you know, the Southern Hemisphere, whether it's a global call for reparations that we see in many places. I think it's all fueled by, it can fuel this unity within the diaspora, right? So Azmera, I'm thinking, so when me as a Black woman raised strictly in the U.S. and in the South U.S., you as a Black Palestinian-American living in the U.S., how we sat around those circles with Black Brazilian women and those circles sharing stories, right? So it wasn't just we went for this cultural immersion experience, but I feel like doing that also restores a part of ourselves when we are in community with others in the diaspora, right? So I think about, because, you know, since I was a preacher, 1 Corinthians 12 says, you know, right, though there is one body, there are many parts, right? And that all belong to one body. And that's how I see us, that we are many parts all over the globe, but we should see ourselves as part of this one body. But we're many peoples, right? And so I think because it testifies that God, who can bring what I'm going to call, when I said that we scattered, but we not lost, that this is the way for us to bring us back together when we kind of understand that concept, that we all come from one people, and that, you know, as we have all articulated, we're not the same. And we should love that about us and be able to respect that, because at the end of the day, we're all looking to be liberated, freed up from the ongoing white domination, this desire to dominate, to have power over people by any means necessary, right? If that means just snatch you up off the street and nobody knows where you are. If that means then a total ban on abortion, where you have a Black woman in Atlanta who was brain dead but forced to remain pregnant, and now the family is left to deal with this premature child and all the medical expenses, right? And that they could not turn the life support system off because she was pregnant. I'm just talking about the ways in which it is always functioning and at work. And when we do not see the larger picture of how it shows up in different places in different parts of the world, it's the same system, it's the same play manifested in different ways. So the last thing I want to talk about that we have time to talk about today, we'll have to come back for part two. Let's just talk about, right, how we see the collective or the connectedness of our different struggles, but the same struggle as our collective survival, right? How do we, how is this diaspora connected in a way that we see ourselves in a collective struggle and not as individual struggle? So I know when I started ramping up, all across social media, like, well, that's not our fight. That's not our issue, right? And the fact is, some of y'all look Haitian, they can snatch you off the street. They're not going to ask for your papers, right? And so can we just kind of have a conversation about that to kind of round out this conversation? And maybe when you answer that question, just go ahead and give me your final thoughts at the same time. So, Elom, why don't you go?
Yeah, totally. I think it's so important because the struggle is collective. The struggle is for all of us. And even though we have different methods and different means and different tools in the toolbox, it is important that we realize that no one is free until each one is free. And I'm thinking, this thought just came to me. I'm thinking a lot about how diaspora has been framed traditionally as mediated by geography. So we are in different physical lands or physical spaces. And while that is true, I think we're getting to a place and a point where the diaspora is connected not only by physical movement, rather by a mental movement. Because this is where the battle is being fought. This is where the colonial battle is being fought. Because today we might not have the colonial apparatus that we might be used to visually, but the mind is the site of this colonial battle. And it is about what we're thinking and how we're thinking about ourselves, our place in the world, our history, and about our future. So I want to invoke a thinker, a Kenyan thinker, I believe, called Ngugi wa Thiong'o. And Ngugi wa Thiong'o says that it is important to decolonize the mind. It is important to decolonize our language. It is important to decolonize how we read and recite and retell our histories, because this is where the battle will be won. When we're able to do that, I think a lot about Octavia Butler. Octavia Butler is saying that it is imperative. It is a survival mechanism to tell new stories, tell new Black stories, tell new Black stories of Black people in a new world. And if we're unable to do that, which we are, or if we allow the powers that be, as we're seeing, to erase our histories, to retell our histories, to manipulate our histories, to dilute our histories, we've lost the battle. So that's the first thing I'm really thinking about as a way of collective struggle, decolonization of the mind, and realizing that geography is not the only thing separating the diaspora. It's the mental, it's the mental framework. The next thing I'm really thinking about is, and into that, I want to lift up the idea of Sankofa. And Sankofa, for listeners who might not know, is a traditional Ghanaian idea, a Akan idea that means going back to take from the past and to inform the future and to inform the present. So I want to lift that up because I mean, you think about writers like, I want to lift up a Nigerian author, Ife Amadiome. Ife Amadiome talks about gender roles, the what we would call progressive. She talks about male daughters and female husbands. And this is something that the West talks about as, oh, well, this is progressive. We're now discovering this. No, we have had these ideas. We have had these thoughts, these cosmologies. I mean, in my language, when we call God, God doesn't have a gender.
Right.
And these conceptions of a fluid divine have existed long before the Church of England said God
Long
is a
before.
baby, please. We
Long
know
before,
this. We
yes.
know this. So just to like wrap up, I want to lift that up. And I want to say that finally, it is so important for them not to divide and instrumentalize us against each other.
Yes.
Through knowledge, and it's through embodied solidarity that we're able to do this. And through a rigid hope, something about our people, wherever we find ourselves, is that there is a stubborn hope that we will not go under.
Yes.
We will not give up. And whether it was from the hush harbors or whether it was from the ships off the coast of West Africa, we are a people who've always known that by the help of the divine, we will always overcome. So I want to lift these up as sort of final concluding thoughts.
Yes, thank you. That's so powerful. That's so powerful and rich. And I can't even respond to it because the time is running out. So you all gonna definitely come back for a part 2. Azmera, please.
I know. What Elom just shared reminds me of what Steve Biko, right, tells us. That the most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed, right? And so what I love about what we're doing here and what you all are doing with Fannie Lou Hamer, right? She's the one who put forth this whole concept we hear in movement everywhere. And sometimes I wonder and I worry if people are understanding and really giving credit where credit is due to the Black women and the Black trans women and people who birthed these movements that we all get liberated from, right? She's the one who tells us that everybody is free or nobody's free, right? What I love about it is that it's inviting us to continue to refine, reflect, and like you said, recover, but also create possibility to repair, because the truth is, and a lot of my work focuses on lately, what do we do when there's harm? Because we're human, right? Back to this principle Ellen was talking about. We all have growth edges. None of us are perfect.
Right.
We are imperfect beings seeking liberation, seeking, salvation, seeking to become free, but not just for ourselves, right? Because what does it mean if I'm free, but my siblings aren't? And so I think for me, it's reminding us that we are each other's keeper, that we can hold space for grace.
Yes.
And that doesn't have to mean self-betrayal.
Right.
I think that's a lot for me, thinking a lot about family systems healing. Families are the ones that we love, but the ones that teach and the ones that challenge us. What does it mean to heal families and communities and to be a part of the human family, the African diasporic family, our families? Seeing it all as, again, and that's Patricia Hill Collins, who talks about how the personal is political, right? And so for me, I think it's always coming back to that, like, okay, we are each other's keeper. Who am I accountable to? Who am I accountable to? I'm accountable to Ellen. I'm accountable to you. I'm accountable to my people, right? And I think it's important for us to hold this piece. And Bell Hooks, again, always reminds us that love is not just the presence of care, it's the presence of responsibility, of accountability, of a knowingness. And if we can continue to invoke that love, then I know we will get there, right? We will get there. We're on our way.
Listen, this has been such a rich conversation. I have just loved being in community with you, even via technology. One day we're going to be in person doing this thing. So let's thank Elom and Azmera for the amazing ways they have blessed us on today and stretched our minds, and hopefully they nurtured your imagination in the process, that you might begin to see what you can do to begin to educate yourself even more on the importance of the African diaspora, what you can do to repair, to use Azmera's language, but also to connect with and expand your mind and expand the table and to make space for that which is not something just like you. We're not a monolithic people. So thank them. Next week, I'm going to continue this conversation, and we're going to move to having a conversation around faithful solidarity, mobilizing the global majority for justice. So we're going to be having a focus on faith-rooted activism And we'll have scholars with us, activists with us who are committed to collective freedom and liberation around the globe. So you all got us started so people can have a foundation, because next week is going to be the doing. How do we begin to engage in movements and to support movements? And we're going to have that from what I'm going to say, another different perspectives from a Black American, from, I believe, someone who is Muslim, and someone who is Native and Hispanic, right? So we're trying to really have the conversations where we have diversity in our conversation about what it moves to build these global justice movements. So thank you all again, and thank you all for being here in Fannie's Classroom. We look forward to seeing you on next week, 12 o'clock noon in Fannie Lou's Classroom.
From the church house to the